The first night, he only heard breathing. The second night, he saw the shape. The third night, he realized it wasn't hiding in the alleyway. It was waiting for him. Ethan worked late shifts at a downtown hotel, the kind where the silence after midnight feels heavier than the air itself. He always took the same route home, a narrow alleyway shortcut that sliced between a row of old brick apartments. It wasn't dangerous, not really, just dark, quiet, forgotten. But 3 weeks ago, he noticed something strange. There was a wet stain on the wall, fresh, too dark to be water, too thick to be rain. He assumed it was nothing, maybe a leaky pipe or kids messing around, until the next night when the stain had moved. It was a few feet down the alley, closer to the other end. Same shape, same size, as if someone had peeled it right off the bricks and dragged it slightly further along. Ethan's skin prickled. He stopped walking that route for a few days, taking the long way around just to clear his head. When he finally returned, the stain wasn't on the wall anymore. It was on the ground, right in the center of the alleyway, like a dark, ugly welcome mat. He hesitated, then stepped over it. That's when he heard a sound behind him, a soft exhale. Not human, not animal, just breath. Ethan tried to convince himself it was just stray cats or some weird plumbing noise from one of the old buildings. Paranoia, that's all it was. But the next night, he saw it. Not the stain, the outline. Something tall and impossibly thin was pressed flat against the alley's far wall. It was so still, so perfectly camouflaged, that he thought it was just a new piece of graffiti. But then it shifted. It peeled slightly away from the bricks, like wet paper curling in the sun. Ethan felt a pulse of pure dread shoot through him. He fumbled for his phone, switching on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, and the shape vanished. He backed up fast, his hand shaking so much the light danced across the grimy walls. When the light hit the ground, he saw them. Fresh footprints in the dirt, not shoe prints. Bare feet. Long, thin impressions, as if someone had been standing right behind him the whole time. He ran home. That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept seeing that thin shape peeling away from the wall in his mind, like something struggling to break free from the stone. He told himself not to go back. But the next night, curiosity, or maybe something worse, pulled him back. And the alley looked different, cleaner, brighter somehow, almost inviting. Ethan stepped deeper in, his caution warring with an inexplicable pull. Then he noticed the stain was back. Only now it was higher, way up near the roofline. As if the shape was climbing, Ethan decided to stop playing scared. He was going to face this, whatever it was. He brought a stronger flashlight, one of those industrial ones with a beam that could cut through smoke. He stepped into the alley. It was silent, but not empty. About 20 feet ahead, the wall bulged, not like stone cracking, like skin stretched too tight over bone. The bulge slid downward, slowly, leaving a wet smear behind it. Ethan froze, his breath caught in his throat. The smear reached the ground and then began to rise, forming shoulders, then arms, then legs. A thin, paper-like man stepped forward. Its body was flat as a sheet of cardboard, its face stretched blankly across its surface, featureless and pale. When Ethan shined the light directly at it, the shape twisted, crumpling in on itself with a horrible, dry cracking sound like old parchment being crushed. He turned to run, but at the mouth of the alley, blocking his escape, another flat figure peeled off the opposite wall. Then another, and another. 3 perfect, dark silhouettes unfolding from the bricks like shadows being reborn. Each one stepped into the center of the alley and turned its blank face toward Ethan. He ran deeper, heart slamming against his ribs, only to find the alley dead-ended at a high brick wall. He spun around. The shapes pressed themselves against the walls, whenever his flashlight beam touched them. Light didn't hurt them, it hid them. They could blend into whatever surface they touched. The floor, the walls, doorways, even the shadows themselves. One shape peeled off the ground, just inches from Ethan's foot. He stumbled backward, slamming into a locked metal service door, the cold steel a shock against his back. He screamed for help, a raw, desperate sound that the narrow walls swallowed whole. No one heard. Ethan grabbed a loose brick from the ground, his fingers numb with terror, and hurled it at the closest shape. It struck the thin figure and passed straight through. The thing rippled like cloth in a breeze. Then it lunged. Not forward, but around him, folding over his shoulders, sliding down his spine, wrapping him like a second suffocating layer of skin. He clawed at it, but his fingers only dug into his own flesh. The shape sank into him, merged with him. His legs buckled. Ethan gasped as something impossibly cold seeped into his bones, rearranging his weight, flattening his very shadow. The alley faded from view. When he finally staggered out an hour later, he walked differently, moved differently. His steps made no sound on the pavement, and his shadow, cast by the streetlights, was too thin, too sharp. The next night, the wet stain appeared in the alleyway, again back on the highest part of the wall, near the roof. Neighbors started reporting strange sounds, like breathing coming from behind the bricks. People who walked past claimed the graffiti looked different every night. More detailed, more human, more like Ethan. 2 days later, a delivery driver, making a late-night drop, looked up and saw it. A flat, human-shaped silhouette stuck high on the alley wall. He swore it blinked. If you heard breathing coming from an empty alleyway, would you go closer or would you run? Let me know in the comments and subscribe for more true eerie stories. The police never explained what happened on Route 93's midnight bus. The cameras captured everything except the faces. Passengers disappeared one by one, yet the bus never seemed to stop moving. To this day, the official report is sealed, but the footage, it tells a different story. It was the last bus of the night, the 12:10 a.m. from the east side. Daniel boarded half asleep, headphones in, just wanting to get home. The bus was sparsely populated, 9 passengers in total. There was a young couple, 2 teenagers glued to their phones, and an older woman quietly knitting. A tall man in a coat far too heavy for the summer heat stood out, as did a businessman staring intently at his phone. In the back, a quiet woman with a backpack kept to herself. And then there was the driver, who didn't say a single word, not even a grunt of acknowledgement. Everything felt perfectly normal, just another late-night ride home. That is, until Daniel happened to glance up at the bus's digital route display above the windshield. It wasn't showing a destination. It just said, in transit. He figured it was just a glitch, a broken sign. But then his eyes drifted to the clock right underneath it. 12:10 a.m. A minute passed. He looked again. 12:10 a.m. Still, time wasn't moving. The first real sign that something was deeply wrong came at the 4th stop. The bus pulled up, the doors hissed open, but no one got off. And no one got on. After a few silent seconds, the doors closed and the bus pulled away. The driver didn't even glance up from the wheel. Daniel pulled out his phone. No signal, no Wi-Fi, and the time on his screen was frozen, matching the bus clock. 12:10 a.m. He looked around at the other passengers. They were all quiet, almost unnaturally still. Maybe they were just tired. Maybe it was nothing. But then, one of the teenagers sitting across from him leaned over and whispered, "Did you hear that?" Daniel hadn't, but a moment later he felt it, a low rhythmic vibration, a deep humming pulse that seemed to be coming from the very back of the bus. It felt like something was breathing, right behind the last row of seats. The knitting woman's hands paused, her needles trembling slightly. The couple leaned away from the aisle, closer to each other. Even the man in the heavy coat shifted, sitting up straighter. The hum grew louder, more insistent. Daniel turned his head just enough to glance down the long aisle of the bus. He saw nothing out of the ordinary, but then he noticed where everyone else was looking. Not at the front, not at each other. They were all staring out the windows. Daniel followed their gaze. Outside, there were no buildings, no streetlights, no familiar city roads. Just an endless, featureless black. The bus wasn't traveling through the city anymore. It was traveling out of it. At 12:10 a.m. again, a passenger vanished. The quiet woman with the backpack was there one moment and gone the next. There was no sound, no scream, no blur of motion. Just an empty seat, still warm from where she had been sitting. Everyone saw it, and everyone froze. The couple held hands so tightly, their knuckles turned white. The older woman clutched her knitting needles to her chest like a shield. The teenagers had stopped whispering. Now they were muttering prayers under their breath. Daniel couldn't take the silence anymore. He stood up, his voice shaking. What the hell is going on? He shouted at the driver. The driver didn't turn around, didn't move, didn't even seem to blink. His silhouette was rigid against the windshield. Daniel stumbled forward, grabbing the pole for balance. Hey, stop the bus. He reached the driver's seat and put a hand on his shoulder. But as he looked closer, he realized the man wasn't breathing. His hands were locked on the steering wheel, but he wasn't alive. And in his reflection in the windshield, there was no face. Just a blank screen of static. The hum behind the passengers grew louder, closer. Then another person vanished. The man in the suit. One blink gone. Then the tall man in the heavy coat. Gone. The bus wasn't just taking them somewhere. It was taking something from them. Their presence, their time, their identity. Each disappearance made the hum grow stronger, as if the entity on the bus was feeding on the empty seats. The lights flickered, went out, and came back on a second later. When they did, Daniel was the only passenger left. The bus began to slow. It didn't come to a complete stop, but Daniel felt a shift in weight as it coasted. The doors hissed open. Outside was a road he didn't recognize. Black dirt. No stars in the sky. No sound at all. A whisper echoed from the back of the bus. A voice made of static and air. Seat taken. Next. Daniel didn't hesitate. He jumped off. The bus doors slammed shut behind him with a final metallic thud. The bus pulled away with impossible speed, its headlights stretching into the black like threads before disappearing completely. Daniel stood alone on that dirt road, long after the sound had faded into nothing. Hours later, a truck driver found him walking barefoot along Highway 27. When Daniel frantically asked what time it was, the driver just held up his phone. It read 12:10 a.m. It stayed 12:10 a.m. for the entire drive back to town. When Daniel finally made it home, he checked his security camera. The footage showed him leaving his house at 11:55 p.m. to catch the midnight bus. But then, it showed another version of him leaving again at 11:55 p.m. And another, and another. A never-ending loop of himself walking to the same bus stop, disappearing onto the same midnight bus. The police later found the route logs. Bus 93 wasn't scheduled to run at midnight. That service had been discontinued 5 years earlier, after a terrible accident where no one survived. But some nights, they say the bus still makes the run. It still picks up passengers, and it still keeps them in transit. Thanks for watching. If this story chilled you, be sure to subscribe for more. The first sign was small. His front door camera started showing deliveries he never received, all time stamped yesterday. Then the footage showed him but wearing the clothes he planned to wear tomorrow. Daniel had lived in the same suburban house for 3 quiet years. Normal neighborhood, normal routines. Nothing strange ever happened. Until the day he reviewed his security system and noticed something off. He'd received package notifications from the previous day, but he never saw any package arrive. He checked the footage. It showed a delivery driver placing a box on his porch, ringing the bell, and walking off. But when Daniel opened his front door, there was nothing there, not even footprints in the dirt. At first, he just chalked it up to a glitch in the system, a simple error. But that night, at exactly 11:42 p.m., the camera pinged again. He looked at the feed. It showed Daniel, same height, same posture, stepping outside to take out a trash bag. The problem was, Daniel was already in bed, and the version of him on the camera was wearing different clothes. Clothes he hadn't even worn yet. They were the clothes he had laid out for the next day. A knot of unease tightened in his stomach. This wasn't a simple glitch. The next morning, the world felt slightly wrong. When he walked into his kitchen, the chairs were on the opposite side of the room from where he'd left them. His front doormat was flicked over. His toothbrush was wet, even though he hadn't used it yet. He lived completely alone. There was no one else who could have done these things. Panicked, he checked the camera again. The footage showed him walking from room to room, performing each of those actions all time-stamped yesterday. Same camera angles, same house, but it was a version of yesterday that he never lived. He tried to rationalize it. He compared the real-time camera shots to the recordings. The house wasn't just glitching. It was repeating a different version of the same day, completely out of order. On Wednesday, the cameras showed footage from what seemed to be Friday. On Thursday, they showed Monday. And every single night, at the stroke of midnight, all the footage rearranged itself into a new, jumbled timeline. Then, the house itself started changing along with the recordings. He noticed tiny things at first. The walls had scuff marks he didn't remember making. The light bulbs in the hallway were suddenly a warmer, yellower color. His bed smelled faintly of a cologne he had never worn in his life. He finally understood. His house wasn't haunted by a ghost. It was returning another version of itself, from another reality. Every single night, Daniel had to know for sure. He needed undeniable proof. He took a thick black permanent marker and drew a large X on the living room wall. If the house switched versions again, the X would be his anchor, his one constant. That night, sleep was impossible. At 2:11 a.m., his phone pinged, a motion alert. He checked the live feed, nothing moved. Everything was still. Then, with trembling hands, he checked the feed labeled yesterday, and he nearly dropped his phone. The X was gone. In yesterday's footage, a version of him was meticulously sanding the mark off the wall. Daniel sprinted down the stairs into the living room. The X was gone there too. In its place was a different mark, a small, neat circle drawn in the exact same spot. He frantically scrubbed through the old footage. His cameras showed the circle appearing as early as last week, in recordings he had never seen before. Every night, the house wasn't just rewinding or glitching. It was actively choosing which version of yesterday to bring back. He started searching, and he found dozens of tiny, maddening differences. Doors that now closed in the wrong direction. A window in the study that now opened upward instead of sliding sideways. The cabinets in his kitchen were completely rearranged. The hallway felt an inch shorter. He swore his bedroom closet had 2 shelves, but now it had 3. Each morning, he woke up in a slightly different version of his home. Each morning, the house returned a yesterday that never belonged to him. On the last night, he set up a final test, a desperate attempt to communicate. He placed a handwritten note on the kitchen table, the words stark and clear. "If you are not me, do not sign this." He went to his bedroom, but he didn't sleep. He just waited. At 3:14 a.m., the system pinned. He fumbled for his phone and checked the camera. His other self walked into view, picked up the pen, and signed the paper. The handwriting wasn't his, and below the signature, 2 words were scrawled. "Welcome back." Daniel ran into the kitchen. The note was there, but now there were 2 copies of it. One signed by him, one signed by whoever had been living as yesterday's. The house was quiet, too quiet. As he stepped out of the kitchen and into the hallway, he saw it. Every single door in his home was slightly open, as if they were all waiting for him. If you lived in a house that changed every night, would you stay or would you run? Subscribe for more true eerie stories.